Welcome to this panel on Brexit at Oxford Town Hall, organised by Oxford for Europe. I'll already mention the hashtag for the event, which is Oxford, the letter for Europe, in one word. So do tweet throughout the event, do report on it in a variety of media outlets. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Ruvi Ziegler. I'm a lecturer in law at the University of Reading, a research associate at the Refugee Study Centre here at the University of Oxford, and I'm also the Oxford convener of New Europeans, which is one of the organisations that support this event, which, as I said, was organised by Oxford for Europe. I'll mention and name and fame all the really good people that are around here and have put this event together at the end of this event. So there's no worry that they will be left forgotten. So I'll just mention the other organisations that are involved in this event. The Oxford European Association, which was set up in Oxford City Council, and perhaps we'll hear about a bit later. The European Movement Oxford branch, and the 3 Million, which is a grassroots organisation in the UK. I also want to thank City Council for providing us the venue, and to note that Bob Price, the leader of the council, is here, and there'll be a question, or will be here. If I can't see Bob actually in a second. Oh yeah. So thank Bob for his help with putting this together, and there will be a question specifically on Oxford-related matters that will be addressed to him. The impetus for holding this in the first place was a letter that myself and two of my colleagues, Annie McKee and Tessa Clayton, have written to the Oxford Mail, an open letter inviting the Oxford MPs to speak to their constituents back in November and address the concern that people in Oxford have about the fallout from the vote in the referendum. As we all know, the country nationally voted 51.9% for leave. The city of Oxford overwhelmingly, about 70%, voted to remain on a 72% turnout. And obviously people in this hall and the questions we've received indicate a great deal of concern. The evening's format will be as followed. We have grouped together the sort of topics that have arisen from the questions we've received into 4 main themes, which we will follow through this evening. The first being, quite naturally perhaps, considering this week's events, the Supreme Court judgment and the bill introduced in Parliament, will be Article 50, parliamentary scrutiny of the bill, and indeed scrutiny in Parliament and in other means of the arrangements agreed with the EU27 further down the line. We'll then move on to look at non-UK EU citizens, both at their guaranteeing their status, but also at the question of what are the criteria, whether the criteria as they are interpreted by the United Kingdom for receiving permanent resident status in particular are reasonable and whether they should change. We'll then look at Brexit's effects on Oxford and specifically on science research and business, and on the city more specifically. And then finally, we'll look at the UK's future relations with the EU27, so the different models that we might consider as possible. The general format that we'll follow is BBC Question Time style, in the sense that we have pre-selected for each segment a questionnaire or two to ask they're interested in this topic and what sort of contributions they're hoping to make. And then we'll turn to the very first question. So maybe I'll start on my left, and then we'll go on my right. Yeah, you can leave it.
Right, so I think everyone can hear me, as Ruvi said. Maybe if you can't, then too late. So good evening, and it's great to see so many people here. So everyone asked me to do that. So I'm leader of the Green Group on Oxford City Council, and in which capacity I've put 2 motions.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Liz Leffman. I'm a district councillor, Liberal Democrat district councillor on West Oxfordshire District Council, And last October, it was my great pleasure to be the by-election candidate in the Witney constituency, in favour of remaining in the EU. I'm also somebody who has a business in Europe, and I've been running that business now for 25 years in Romania. I import goods from
university. Why am I on this panel? Well, of course, higher education will have a lot of issues to sort out when we do finally Brexit.
The court has so ruled, and we have a bill. What amendments would the panel like to put down which would stand some chance of being incorporated into the Act?
Great. So can I ask Craig first?
Well, thank you. Many of the amendments. I think the issue is whether or not you think if the amendments fail, Article 50 should still be voted through, and that for me is the crunch point. I think voting through Article 50... And the reason we have to stop it now, and that's the basis of...
Surprise you that I wouldn't actually put any amendments, largely because I support the bill going through exactly as it is, but also because I'm not sure that this is the time to do it. There is an awful lot of debate to be had and discussion, quite clearly. There is a phenomenal amount of detail that will be involved in our withdrawal from the European Union, but trying to tag those onto a bill at this stage, particularly with a view to trying to thwart a process that's already been determined and approved by the British public, I think is a mistake.
Can we just keep the events civil, please? Thank you.
I find it curious, really, that people like Craig think there is still an opportunity to stop this. There was an awful lot of talk in the run-up to the referendum last June about how the sky would fall in and house prices would collapse and all these things. Very little of that's happened. And I know, if any, in fact.
Guys,
well, I'm pretty sure the sky was there this morning and we're all in one piece. So there was a huge amount of pessimism, but from my party as well, the Prime Minister, the Chancellor spoke, I think, in some ways which was beyond really what they should have said at the time. But a lot of that, in fact, all of those fears of what would happen immediately afterwards didn't come to pass. And I think at this point, I think at this point, the sensible thing for all of us to do is to get the process moving, get on with the discussion, and have sensible conversations about the detail.
Okay, I mean, I'm sure we'll return to some of the themes later, John, and you will have your hearing. I'll guarantee that. Can I turn to Liz, please?
Departure, but they did not vote for the destination. And we haven't been told anything at all about what that destination will look like. We're being told that we have to come out of the single market, but we are not being told what the consequences of that will be. I'm sure we will return to this later in this discussion this evening, because the consequences are very serious indeed. For us to go forward in this way, for Parliament not to be allowed to have its say on what this is going to look like, is, in my opinion, not what the Brexiters want, which is to bring democracy back to our Parliament, but the exact opposite. To say that the people have had their say, that we must respect the democratic process, and then to say that the people will have to shut up about it from now on, is the exact opposite of recognising democracy. Surely... I'd like to make the point that between now and 2019, if indeed we do manage to exit the EU in that period, and there's a great deal of doubt over that, quite a large number of people who were denied a vote in June last year, who were 16 at the time, will be able to vote by then. And quite a large number, I'm sorry to say, who voted in the referendum will be passed away. So is it not right that because the electorate has changed its composition, that new electorate is given a say at the end of the process? That is one of the things that the Liberal Democrats will be asking for, and we will be doing that through our parliamentary party, both in the Commons and in the House of Lords.
Thank you, Liz. I'll want to return when we...
I do, however, though believe that there is a scale of national crisis facing us, which requires very, very careful thought on the question of Article 50. And I'll tell you why. Yes, in percentage terms, the referendum outcome was relatively narrow, but more than 1 million more people voted leave than voted remain. And for me, it's a fundamental matter of democracy. We asked the people their view, they told us, and it has to be implemented. We shape how it is implemented, and not to do so would unleash an almost, in modern times, I believe, unparalleled political crisis in this country, where those people who voted leave would say, see, it's the political establishment, they're not listening, they're out of touch, they say they're Democrats, but when it comes to the crunch, they're not really. I am a Democrat, and I will honour the people's verdict. There's something else which is very relevant to my personal position. During the campaign, I promised people on both sides of the argument that I would accept and implement the verdict, and I shall keep that promise.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll return to that other question of the amendments in a couple of minutes. Alistair, do you have a position on this?
Yes, I have a clear position on this. I agree with John and I agree with Andrew. If I had a vote, I would vote for the bill, much though I am completely aghast against the decision to Brexit. I have a copy of the bill here. This is the bill. Yeah. It's not the shortest bill ever. Actually, the shortest bill ever was the 1918 bill to allow women to stand for being an MP, which was 27 words. The point is, we've had a referendum and we've had a result, however much some of us hate it. So, fair dues. The point of this bill is to settle a technical, legal argument, which is a simple argument. Who gets to trigger Article 60? Parliament
50.
or the... 50, sorry. Parliament or the Prime Minister. And the legal answer was clear. So I think we should be doing all of our persuading and all of our lobbying to make sure that the thing that gets debated...
Reciprocal undertakings for the British citizens who are in the EU, and I understand the EU position is that they won't negotiate anything until the negotiations formally start. So until Article 50 is served, they won't enter into that discussion.
Can we have that specific segment specifically on EU nationals a bit later, but I take it your point is the list of the amendments that you've proposed, you'd very much want them to go through, but even if none of them go through, you would still vote for Article 50. And Craig, I gather your position earlier was that Article 50 process is triggered, but in a way relates back also to the question of what sort of amendments do get accepted. And who gets to decide at the end of the process what happens. So.
Yeah, if the Article 50 is triggered, and obviously we're, particularly to Andrew, but also reactions from the other parties, how can we make sure that we're not faced with a situation that the deal is finally announced about a week before the point at which the EU falls off the cliff? How do we make sure that, as Mr. Barnier says, that there should be 6 months at the end for all the national parliaments, including the British Parliament, to give a view? And I would hope that the provision for a possible referendum, if it appears that the deal is a bad one, the possibility of a further referendum, which would mean we do need 6 months at the end before Britain is bundled out of the EU. Can I have your comments?
Right. So before I turn to people's comments...
yeah, so I think that any meaningful...
The ladies in the back, and then I'll come to the front.
Thanks very much. My name's Charlotte Ryland. I've got a response to and a question for John Cotton. Since last June, I've spent quite a lot of time online, as I'm sure lots of people have here, reading views from both sides, because I'm desperate to understand what's happening to our country, or what's already happened to our country, and where this vote came from. I've been entirely open to the other side's view, and I have read some quite thoughtful responses and some quite thoughtful arguments from Leavers. However, whenever I read the argument, the fear-mongering was made up. Look what's happened since June. The sky hasn't fallen in, as John said. I press close on that window immediately because it is a nonsense argument. We have not left the European Union yet, sorry. We've not left the European Union yet. And I think that you, as the one member, the one Leave voter on the panel, owe it to the Leave voters in this country to actually give us a proper argument for why this country should leave the European Union.
Okay, I'm going to collect a few before turning to the panel. Can we go to the front a little bit? I mean, I apologize, I'm not going to be able to bring everyone in, but the lady over there, yeah, I try to think.
Hi, my name is Ofra Magador. I wanted to ask, we keep being told that we have to respect the result of the referendum, even if we don't like it, because this is what the people have voted for. Even if we accept that, here's a question that wasn't on the referendum. Do you want to leave the single market?
Okay, so we are returning to that particular theme. That's
okay,
within
so
the arrangement of
we
the
are
Brexit.
now, just to finish the comment, we are now being told that there's a bill that's going to be voted for in favour. It's going to be irreversible, that decision, and the government is telling us that the way it wants to implement that is by leaving the single market. So we're irreversibly telling the British people that they're now being forced into a route that they were never asked whether they want to go down. How is that a democratic process?
Okay. Yeah. One more. Okay. I will come back to other people later on, but let's have one more question here in the front.
Thank you. Tessa Clayton. This is a question for Andrew Smith. You've made your position quite clear just now that you will vote for Article 50 anyway because that's what the country voted for. My question to you is, what about representing your constituents, the majority of whom... The majority of whom voted that they wanted to remain very, very clearly. Lots of them are clearly here tonight as well. How are you going to represent us, and have you thought about how that might affect the vote for this constituency again in the future?
Okay, so we will, okay, that's great. So let's try and stick to about a minute each so we can move to the next topic, but I'll give Andrew the first round of response to this.
The first thing I owe my constituents is my judgment, and that is my judgment, what I've said, and keeping my promise, the promise I made to people during the campaign that I would honour the national verdict. But it's actually fallacious to assume that because in Oxford East it was probably nearer 65-35, the actual vote, because there were more Leave voters in Oxford East than there were in the bit of Oxford. So it's actually fallacious to assume that because 65% voted Remain, that 65% don't want to respect the referendum. We've got people on this panel here and myself who voted Remain, but who nonetheless believe the referendum should be respected. National polls for what they're worth, and you have to discount them, I agree, but the polls that have been show something like 50% of Remain voters nationally believe that, notwithstanding their own vote, that the referendum should be honoured, and more than 90% of Leave voters believe it should be honoured. If you apply those percentages to the shares in Oxford East, we're probably split down the middle as to whether the referendum should be honoured or not. I believe it should be, and as I say, I owe you my judgment, and that's it.
Okay, let me bring Craig in. If you've got anything to say on this.
Yeah, so I mean, as Andrew said, we live in a representative democracy. It's for our elected officials to make their best judgment on it. And looking at the referendum, it was an advisory referendum, and it's advisory for a reason. Because ultimately it's Parliament that makes the decision, our elected representatives, and come election time, people will put their vote in wherever they think the person's represented them best. And I think, Andrew, you'll have a problem when it comes to the next election if you're standing again. So you've said that before.
Okay.
Anyway, so just finish. I mean, there are other considerations to take into account: the cost of Brexit, the effect on the union, the effect on the Good Friday Agreement, the fact that 5 million people were denied a vote, not just the 16 and 17-year-olds, but the expats and the EU nationals living in the UK. So these are what we need to take into account.
Okay, John, if you have a short comment.
So the 2 points. I don't. So the lady at the back who asked the question directly, I don't want to rehearse the arguments from last summer. I think there's a danger we could do that. But I would sum it up this way. I am very optimistic about the potential for our country outside the European Union. That is the reason I voted to leave. It's as simple as that. Do I think our chances for my children, their children, the rest of residents in this area are better or worse, inside or out? My view, my balance, the reason that the conclusion I reached was we're better out, facing out in the world, trading out with the world, being the country that we're capable of being.
Yeah.
That's on that. Can I just pick up the point from the... I missed it was a lady gentleman. I think it was a lady here was saying about, did we know about leaving the single market? I've heard that talked about many, many times, and I'm more than happy to see you afterwards and point you to a clip on the internet. Politician after politician, Nick Clegg, David Cameron, Boris Johnson, all of them said very, very clearly it would mean leaving the single market.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There can be no doubt that anybody who followed the debate, even remotely closely, would have known that.
Yeah, we'll return to this if we may. Let's refrain from that. I mean, we do have a specific theme looking at the EU's future relations, in which the point about the single market or the internal market it's referred to in EU law will be addressed. So, Alistair.
Yes, I mean, I've got one kind of simple and unfortunate thing to say. I can feel the emotion in the room, and I really share your pain. I hate the fact that this referendum happened, but we've got to get over it because we're going to leave. So, somebody in my position, I'm not a politician. I'm the boss of a charity, a university, right? And what we are trying to do now is to focus all of our emotions and energy into how we can get the best deal we can. Because I'm really sorry, but it's going to happen.
Okay, Liz, and then we'll move on.
Well, I'm a Liberal Democrat, and I spend my entire life living in hope that one day something great will happen, like we might win an election, something like that. You know what? Unless we live in hope, unless we believe we can change things, things won't change. It's up to us. It's all very well saying, oh well, this has happened, so therefore we've got to make the best of it. I agree, we've got to look at all the options. But the fact remains that when we elect a government, we don't sit back and say, oh well, the Tories won again, we're not going to bother again, it's not worth it. We don't do that. What we say is, we're going to try again. We always do. So why is it any different with a referendum? Why do we have to do what we've been told to do and not stand up for what we believe is right? That's all I say. That's all I suggest we should be doing.
Okay. Great. Well, I'm sure we haven't exhausted that first topic, but we do have 3 others to go.
Right. My son is British, and he has been living with his French partner and 3 children in the UK for 12 years. His French partner is a stay-at-home mum who did not realise that she should have taken out private health insurance as specified in the Immigration Regulations 2006. There are many families in a similar position. Will the government, after Brexit, force my son's partner and eldest child, who has a French passport, to go back to France, thus splitting up the family?
Thank you very much, Michael.
In order to those rights, given that was at the very heart of the debate and concerns around that.
Well, I mean, we've seen what's... I think I understand the situation that they're in with regard to healthcare. I would simply say that we do have reciprocal healthcare. If I go abroad, I'd just like to dispute what John's saying on that. I think the question of whether or not people who are not working here, whether they should be allowed free healthcare, it is absolutely clear to me that we have a responsibility. If somebody is living here and a member of the family is working and their children...
Discutants this evening. It seems to me that one big chunk of the discussion is missing, not only here, but really every time I listen to Parliament discuss the issue of Brexit. Nobody seems to care. This seems to have become a completely internal political issue. Nobody seems to care or know or be curious about what our European partners in these actual negotiations that are going to come through think, plan, or, what's their interpretation of all the behaviours that we've seen by the new, well, not very new now, government in the past few months. And I'm really curious about the positions and sort of the level of knowledge this panel here has on, oh my God, what does Europe think about all this? Right. Do you have any views on that? I'd be very curious to hear them.
Right, I think that might be somewhat too open-ended for this stage. We might leave that contribution on the general European angle later. I'll just add one fact, which is from yesterday, which is the deputy.
Yeah, I think over the next 5 years, if we come out of the single market, that we just cannot cope. I do not know how we are going to manage the care of our elderly population as the country gets older and older. I do not know how we're going to manage this without relying on immigrant labour.
Okay. You want to come in again, or are you okay? Okay. I'll take.
I'm kind of a serial software entrepreneur based in Oxford. I've hired probably 30 or 40 people for 20 years, and the sky has fallen in. It has. I mean, it's a disaster. I really cannot. I'm just about to set up a new set of software companies, and I can't base them in Oxford. I'm going to base them in Dublin. It just makes sense. I have access to the markets. I can hire people from Britain, but I need the legal protections that I'm going to get inside the single market. I cannot take the risk. What do you say about that? Oh, by the way, sorry, just one other question. Where's Nicola Blackwood? Why isn't she here?
So we're not... let me address this later, but...
You talk about sectors, but all of these sectors actually are intertwined with each other and have an effect on the whole of the economy in Oxfordshire. You take one, 16% of the research coming through technical aid grants, research grants from the EU, that will reduce the number of researchers at the university. That has an effect directly on the economy. If Erasmus grants are going, that will be a whole range of postgraduate students will not be there. That will affect the housing situation here. It will affect the economy of Oxford. We come to local government, you forget local government is very dependent through the structural funds and the social fund on funding from the EU. If already local government is being ravaged by cuts, to have that taken away as well will mean more cuts of people who are delivering local government services. The NHS, one of the unions here, Unison Health, actually said 23% of people working in the local hospitals and the care centres, 23% are from the European Union. The whole system would collapse if we actually go into this and those people are denied. And it's not just the public sector. Before the referendum, BMW sent a letter to all their employees saying, We were looking at the result of the referendum, and if we say no, we could be unviable. That would knock the heart and soul out of manufacturing in this city. Okay. So all of these sectors interrelate to each other and can have a dramatic undermining effect if we pull out.
That's great. Just in front of you. No, Andy, just in front of that gentleman. Yes. Yes.
I'm Richard Seabohm. I'm party pre because I used to work in Brussels, but I'm going to cheat as well. I'm going to say that it was on two things from the radio I wanted to quote. One is that Howard Jacobson, Jewish, who said that people clamoured for the reprieve of Barabbas and left Jesus to hang. So much for the voice of the people. Second one is Aaron Banks, who funded the untruths of the Leave campaign with a wall of money on radio and said, "What do you think about that?" He laughed and said, "Well, we won, didn't we?"
Right, okay. General election, rather, Conservative...
Distinct change of policy. David Cameron campaigned strongly to stay in the European Union, so his intent was clearly to stay in the single market. That referendum was lost from his point of view. He's left his post, and Theresa May is implementing it as she sees fit. I'm absolutely clear. In terms of the question I answered earlier from the lady over there, as far as I'm concerned, it's absolutely categorically clear that we voted to leave the protectionist EU and join the global market. We don't want to be inside the EU, we don't want to be inside the single market, we don't want to be inside the customs union. That is black and white, and I don't think there's any debate about that. Can I just address this gentleman over here, though, the gentleman with the software company? Because I think it's a much more pertinent point, because we get into the detail about the impact on business, which for me is, I think, is the most interesting and key element. I'm not going to argue with you about the location of your business, not at all. You're in absolutely the best place to make a judgment about it. I'm a software engineer too. I happen to do most of my business with the US, and I also do work with companies in Asia. So actually, from my point of view, inside the single market, outside doesn't make a drop of a difference to me. But what we have seen in the last 6 months, you've seen huge investment from IT companies. SoftBank, one of the biggest deals in the world in terms of buying ARM. So there are businesses that think differently. That's almost inevitable. Individual businesses will have their own perspective on their specialisms and the people they're dealing with. I fully respect you. If you want to go and move to Dublin and take your business there, it's clearly a loss for the UK economy, and that's to be regretted. But if it's the best option for your business, I'm not going to disagree with you about it.
Okay, let me turn to Liz, please.
Well, no, the referendum did not give us the right, the Prime Minister, who, by the way, is unelected, to simply decide without discussing it with anybody, without discussing it in Parliament, and without asking us whether we wanted to leave the single market. Now, I know for a fact that there are people who voted to leave who definitely do not want to vote, definitely do not want to leave the single market. I've had conversations with people who are quite shocked that we are going down this route of what we call a hard Brexit. People did not vote to become poorer. And I think it's absolutely astonishing that people don't understand that if we come out of the single market, that is what is going to happen. Not just because we will have difficulty employing people, but because businesses who depend on being able to move goods freely around that market are going to have to do things differently. When I was the candidate in the Witney by-election, I visited a lot of businesses locally. We have some quite high-tech businesses in West Oxfordshire. And some of them manufacture for export to the EU, but they actually use components that come in from the EU, which they then put into other components and export those. There is an assumption on the part of many businesses, which has been there for all the time that we've been in the EU, that actually you can bring goods into the UK easily without having to stop at customs. You can do what you need to do with them and you can export them. There's a wonderful system which allows you to do that. And that's what keeps many of our businesses going. And I suspect that companies like BMW and other car manufacturers are highly dependent on being able to move components around and manufacture cars here. And if we are going to have to stop doing that, then that's going to have a major impact on our businesses. My business, for example, depends on being able to move manufactured goods from Romania into the UK and components to manufacture those goods out to Romania in the first place. When I first set this business up 25 years ago, you had to provide an enormous amount of paperwork to accompany the goods every time they moved out and every time they moved in. And there were always hold-ups at customs. That's going to happen again. If we come out of the single market and the customs union, people are going to have to be able to show documents before they can move their goods around. And we're going to have to do things like prove where these goods come from under rules of origin, particularly if we come out and end up operating on WTO rules. And this is going to have a major impact on us. Not only that, but businesses are going to have to pay tariffs if we don't negotiate our way out of that, which is going to effectively put the price of goods up in this country. It's going to mean that retailers, for example, who sell clothing, food, whatever we import, are going to have to either raise their prices or they're going to have to cut costs, which means jobs will go. So there are lots and lots and lots of things that could go very badly wrong indeed. We did not vote for this. Even people who voted for leave did not vote for this. And it is immensely short-sighted of this government to believe that somehow we're going to pick up business by going out and negotiating trade deals around the world, pick up business that has been going for the last, 40 years in some cases. It is utterly wrong. We should definitely not come out of the single market. It's bad for business. It's bad for Britain.
Okay.
Yes, I have a brief answer to the question.
Yeah, this is what he's saying. Somehow they can amend Article 50 to make one happen without the other. You cannot. They're part of the four freedoms of the European Union. And I sympathise with the gentleman over there. My company's also set up an office in Ireland because we also need access to the European market, and we can't wait 2 years to see what's going to happen. And it's regrettable because UK PLC will lose out. Companies won't lose out. They're adaptable, they're flexible, they're agile. They will move around, they will employ staff in different places. It's our economy. And what will have to happen to adapt to do that? You could see if you look at South Korea and Japan, who act as global players in the international marketplace. They go for low tax, they go for low spend, they go for low pay, and they go for low regulation. That is not the sort of UK I want to live in, and that's why we need to stop Article 50 now.
Okay. So I'm conscious that some people already have to leave because we've just gone slightly over 8. So I'm just going to have, because we had one question specifically about City Council, and since we have Bob Price here, can't see you, but okay, yeah. So if I can ask Cathy Wood to ask her question on this.
We can all try to stop, even if we can't stop Brexit, maybe we can stop the anti-foreigner sentiment because we know what happens all around the world when it goes wrong. So what I wanted to ask Bob Price was the fact that I know you have a European association, but it's no one's really heard much about it unless they're in it. Could we do in Oxford, an Oxford is open type campaign like London is open, that's a very public campaign that would make people at least feel welcome, because I think it's a real tragedy how unwelcome everybody's now feeling.
Okay, that's great. So if we could have a short...
Immediately after the referendum result, because of exactly the sentiment which Cathy expressed, which is that we do not want Oxford to be seen anything other than an open, international, welcoming city. And my statement to the press straight after the result was to cover those particular issues. And we saw in Oxford, as elsewhere, a rise in hate crimes in the weeks afterwards, and we worked with the police and with our community associations on that, and that seems to have died down. But the purpose of the association is to bring together all those people in the city who want to work for international links to ensure that we maintain that open, welcoming perspective on the European continent and elsewhere. So we have set up the association. It's had 3 meetings so far, a very successful grouping of people. and we're seeking to establish friendship links with as many of our 27 neighbours as we can. So the intention not is to have full twinning links, but to have friendship links so that we can link with certain cities in those countries to ensure that there's a free movement backwards and forwards of young people, professional groups, sports groups, cultural groups over time, and to build on the success of our twinning links with those friendship links. So the next meeting, I think, is the 24th of February.
23rd, I think. 23rd of February.
23rd of February.
Brian, and indeed Oxford City Council for the help that they've given us. But this is where kind of the rub lies. So this was organised voluntarily, and we've had generously this hall provided by the City Council. But if you found this event to be helpful, useful, and one that you would like repeated with other speakers, and we had apologies, we did try to have a couple of the Oxford MEPs join us tonight, and they have both Catherine Bidder and Annalise Dodds have expressed their desire to attend a future event. We've similarly had Keith Taylor from the Green Party expressing a similar desire, and evening and a very good weekend.
Thank you.
Excuse me, can I ask you a question? What did you make of it?
I thought it was a very good, useful meeting. A lot of many interesting aspects, actually. One's really worried about the situation, but it was very useful to have this exchange of views. It really was. Very good activity indeed. And I like what Bob Price said at the end.
And to get so many people's views in collectively, and to be able to hear what people are saying collectively was really, really helpful, rather than just conversations with one or two people. We are desperately, desperately concerned. I'm desperately concerned about agriculture and the farming industry, which did not come up this evening, but I really sincerely hope we'll have more meetings when we can express our views, because clearly Britain's going to be poorer, and our young people and grandchildren, as a result of following this hardline Brexit. That's what I feel.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask you a question. And what did you think of the debate? Are you concerned at all?
About Brexit and about what's happening? I am really, really concerned about what's happening, yeah. I feel that the referendum was run on some very serious lies. I think that people were misled. I think that that is being underplayed, and if people are expressing ongoing concerns and fears, you know, there's a whole lot of scorn and bad faith. I agree with some of what was said tonight. I think we do need to think about what we do now.
But there's no turning back.
I don't agree there's no turning back. I don't agree that there has been a mandate given to leave the single market. I'm not clear, if you look at the percentage that voted to leave in the referendum, what percentage that is of the overall electorate as it stands now, let alone come 2 years' time when more people are eligible. I think I'm really concerned. I'm concerned about what happens to the families here, all of the arguments that were made about the impact on families, about the impact on the economy and the workers that this country relies on. I think it's, yeah, I'm really concerned. I have a real feeling of dread, and you know, I realise that, you know, my entire lifetime I have taken these rights for granted. They felt like inviolable rights, social rights, workers' rights, environmental rights, protections that people have fought so hard for and that are now so at risk. And they're going to be, what, up for grabs every 4 years. And you heard the Conservative councillor there saying, oh yeah, let's talk about business, that gets to the heart of it. You've just heard about people, the impact on people, and he thinks the business is the most important thing. And if we look, as was said here, if you look at, you know, what will the UK, the weak partner in any trade deal that takes years to negotiate, what will they have to give up in order to get the trade deals that they so need for the economy and for business? Of course, they'll be the very rights that people care about, and people haven't voted to be poorer. They haven't voted to have dirty air, dirty water. They haven't voted to ignore climate change. They haven't voted to rip up workers' rights, maternity rights. I'm really worried, and I really hope that the amendments that get tabled are sensible, will seek to look after people, will look after the families and the workers that are here, and that can stop this complete train wreck that is coming. That's what I hope. Okay.
Well, what did you think of the evening?
I'm glad I came, and I feel like I learned a lot about what local MPs...
Are you concerned about the future?
I'm very concerned. I don't want to be leaving the EU at all. I studied languages. I would like to have the opportunity to potentially move to another EU country, and I feel like that's being taken away from my generation.
There's no turning back, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I know. It's very sad. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Together. Yeah.
I thought it was excellent, and it showed that the majority of people in Oxford, they showed what they feel about Brexit, and I hope all of those standing over there understood and got the message. And I thought the Libdem had just the right answer every time.